Welcome to the Production Livestock Grazing short course. This course has been developed by the UVM Extension Northwest Crops and Soils program team with funding from the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets to provide training for individuals who work with Vermont farmers managing production livestock in pasture systems. The goal of this course is to provide education and resources for new technical service providers with foundational information around grazing planning and providing grazing-related technical assistance to production livestock farmers in Vermont. This course is divided into 5 modules, each covering a different topic area as it relates to providing technical support to grazing operations.
We are here at Module 5, Record Keeping for Improving Grazing Management. The objectives of this module are to gain an understanding of the types of information farmers keep track of throughout the grazing season, the tools farmers can use to keep these grazing records, and how these records can be used to inform management decisions to improve grazing management over time. Let's start with the what. What information are farmers tracking? What data a farmer tracks depends on what they are hoping to gain from it. If their goal is to help improve their management over time, then they are going to want to track how they're managing their pastures and what the resulting outcomes were. We learned in modules 2 and 3 about the factors in farmers' control that impact the health and productivity of our pastures and animals, and how to develop a grazing plan that, if executed properly, should support this goal. Therefore, tracking that same information throughout the season should help us determine how effective the management was and if adjustments should be made to improve outcomes. These factors include the dates when animals enter and exit fields and paddocks, the number and type of animals in the grazing group, the period of occupation for each grazing event, the supplemental feed the animals received during that period, the dates of any haying or clipping events, and the dates and rates of any fertility applications or other interventions. Other contextual or observational information may also be helpful, including weather data or notes, pre- and post-grazing residual heights, soil and pasture condition notes, animal behavior notes, and photos. In deciding what and how to keep grazing records, a farmer must consider the scale they're capturing information at. This might be a whole field level or a smaller subdivision. The key is they must be able to reliably delineate and identify each pasture unit from one another and have acreage for each unit throughout the season. For systems where only the outermost perimeters are set and all internal fencing for subdividing paddocks are temporary and vary significantly throughout the season, this may be much larger units than if there are more permanent subdivisions in the system. This may also depend on the level of technology being used, as there are smartphone applications that can be used to measure paddock areas in real time if a farmer is interested in that level of record-keeping management. As always, the level of detail should match the tools available, the time and capacity of the farmer, and the goal of record keeping. Often, farmers also have access to maps from the local FSA, Conservation District, NRCS, or Extension offices. Creating a map that clearly outlines and labels the pasture units and has acreage information for each can be helpful for the farmer, but also to service providers helping them. Now that we've talked about what might be tracked, what systems are there to track it? There are a lot of different ways people keep records, ranging from very simple and low-tech options to very complex and high-tech options. Common low-tech options that are used include paper or spreadsheet-based grazing charts, a calendar, a notebook or journal, and other spreadsheets. Higher-tech options may include software programs, web-based applications, or smartphone applications. No matter what a farmer chooses, the goal is to find something that fits their time, capacity, budget, management style, and will meet the goal of keeping the records. Low-tech options can work great for record keeping. They're simple and easy to use. They're often free or very inexpensive, and probably the biggest benefit is they are very flexible. A farmer can really tailor these tools to what and how they want to keep records to make it work best for them. Of course, there are still downsides to these types of tools. These systems don't come with any automatic analysis tools to help make comparisons or investigate trends over time. You can't easily integrate other data with these types of records, and they are usually physical objects that take up space and can be difficult to hold on to over time. This is an example of a grazing chart, which is probably one of the more popular low-tech options farmers use. There are spreadsheet versions if you want to use it on a computer, or you can print these sheets out like this and write directly on them. Each row of the chart represents one of the defined pasture units, and then across the top you have a timeline of the season where each day is one grid. Each day the farmer can mark down which unit the grazing group was in. Sometimes farmers use different symbols like a slash versus a backslash to indicate morning or afternoon grazings, and an X for a full day grazing. They can be color-coded to represent different events like clipping, mowing, or spreading fertility. Across the bottom, there are often spaces to keep track of temperature, rainfall, and other notes. This is a good place to also keep track of how many and what type of livestock were in the group, and what else they were being fed during that period. These charts are great because they're sort of a combination of written and visual records. As the chart gets filled in, you can visually see the recovery periods, periods of occupation, and order of the rotation. These grazing charts can often be acquired from local conservation district or extension offices or found online for download. More information about using this type of grazing chart and where to source one can be found in the supplementary materials for this module. The high-tech options, on the other hand, offer more in-depth ways to track and analyze grazing management data. More and more of these tools are becoming available on the market, especially as younger generations who are more familiar and comfortable with these types of technologies enter the industry. They often include mapping features to define pasture management units precisely and allow for editing over the season or between seasons as things change. They also often include both planning and record-keeping tools in one place. Some options have scenario planning tools that can help with things like contingency planning. And some have forecasting models built in to help make grazing timing decisions in real time. A major benefit of these tools is they are digital, which makes long-term storage and referencing easy with no physical documents to keep track of. However, these tools do have some disadvantages. They are typically subscription-based services that vary in cost based on herd size and or acreage, and they can be quite expensive. Some of the tools available are still quite new and may integrate other new technologies that could still improve over time as they are used and these technologies mature. So getting into using one of these too soon might be a little risky. Using these methods requires time on a computer or smartphone, which may or may not fit a farmer's management style, and they may require internet or cell service for some capabilities or optimal performance, which can be challenging depending on location. One of the common goals of grazing record keeping is to document practices to vary compliance with cost share or certification programs. The specific program or certification will dictate the types of documentation required. So as a service provider, it can be helpful to become familiar with common programs and their requirements so that you are better suited to assist a farmer. In general, since these programs are typically trying to verify a producer is using good grazing management, they will typically want to have record of some of the same what's that we went over before. These likely will include, at minimum, paddock entry and exit dates, the number and type of livestock in the grazing group throughout the season, the period of occupation during each grazing event, and the supplemental feed offered during these periods. Using this information, the farmer may need to do some calculations to satisfy documentation requirements. For example, for organic certification, the farmer needs to be able to document that they obtained at minimum 30% dry matter intake from pasture over a total grazing season length of at least 120 days. While the certifier may have specific forms farmers are required to use, as a service provider, you may be asked to assist with gathering this information for this or another reason. So let's walk through an example of what this might look like. This process is essentially the same as what was covered in Module 3 for developing a grazing plan, but that was a bit simplified as it only used one average ration for the whole season. In reality, farmers may change what supplemental feed is being offered many times throughout the grazing season. Ultimately, they will have to document those ration changes and use them to calculate dry matter intake from pasture for each period, which can then be used to document it over the whole season to verify minimum requirements are met. We'll just walk through an example of what a farmer's ration records might look like and how they are used in this dry matter intake calculation. Let's assume we're dealing with the same group of lactating cows as we did in Module 3. They were small dairy cows, each weighing 900 pounds, consuming 4% of their body weight daily. This meant their dry matter demand was 36 pounds of dry matter per animal per day. Now, here's what a farmer may have recorded for ration records. They started grazing on May 5th, and they were feeding 14 pounds of grain per animal and one 1,200-pound round bale of baleage to the herd per day. Another ration change was documented on June 1st, so that first ration was fed from May 5th to June 1st, or 27 total days. Over the next period, the farmer was still grazing the cows and feeding 14 pounds per animal per day of grain, but now only one half of a 1,200-pound round bale of baleage was fed to the herd per day. Another ration change was documented on September 1st, so this second ration was fed for a total of 92 days. Then from September 1st through the end of the grazing season, which ended October 12th, the cows were being fed 14 pounds of grain per animal per day and 1.5 round bales of baleage to the herd for a total of 42 days. Now, this is obviously a simplified version, as there would likely be more changes in rations or days the cows had to be kept inside due to inclement weather, etc. But this is just an example to see how to walk through the process. So let's take a look at this first ration and calculate what their dry matter intake from pasture was. 14 pounds of grain per cow that is recorded as fed, so we have to convert that into pounds of dry matter by multiplying by the dry matter content of the grain. Here we'll say that's 90%, so 14 times 0.9 equals 12.6 pounds of dry matter from grain per cow per day. Now, the farmer said they fed one 1,200-pound round bale of baleage to the herd. Again, we have to convert that into dry matter by multiplying, this time we'll say by 45% dry matter content, which gives us a total of 576 pounds of dry matter, but that was fed to the entire herd of 40 cows. So we'll divide that by 40 to get 14.4 pounds of dry matter from baleage per cow per day. Now, if you remember on the previous slide, we said that these cows had a dry matter demand of 36 pounds of dry matter per day each. So if we take 36 pounds and we subtract the 12.6 pounds of dry matter from grain, and then we subtract the 14.4 pounds of dry matter from baleage, we're left with the remaining dry matter, 9 pounds, that was consumed in pasture. To convert this into a percent of their total intake, we'll take 9 pounds of dry matter from pasture divided by their 36-pound dry matter demand, which gives us 25% dry matter intake from pasture during the period that that ration was fed. Now, we won't walk through each of the rations outlined in the previous slide, so if you want some extra practice, go back to the previous slide and see if you can calculate the dry matter intake from pasture for the other two periods before moving on to the next slide, where we'll go through the whole grazing season calculation. After doing that for all the ration change periods in the season, an average can be calculated. Here's an example using the 3 rations, again, assuming a pretty simplistic scenario just for ease. The first rotation was fed from May 5th to May 30th, or 27 days, and we had calculated the dry matter intake from pasture during that period was 25%. We multiplied 27 days by 25%, or 0.25, to get 6.8. The summer grazing ration was fed from June 1st through August 31st, or 92 days, and that ended up being 46% dry matter intake from pasture during that period. If we multiply 92 days by 46%, or 0.46, we get 42.3. Then finally, the fall grazing ration was fed from September 1st through the end of the grazing season on October 12th, or 42 days. And that ended up being 8.75% dry matter intake from pasture. If we multiply 42 days by 8.75%, or 0.0875, we get 3.7. If we total up the total days where pasture was fed, we see the length of the grazing season was 161 days. If we then total up the last column, we get 52.8 for a total dry matter intake from pasture. We then take that total dry matter intake from pasture of 52.8 and divide by the number of grazing days, 161, and multiply by 100 to convert to a percentage. And we get an average grazing season dry matter intake from pasture of 32.8%. More information on record keeping for organic livestock operations, including required forms and optional worksheets to do these calculations, can be found in the supplemental materials for this module. Besides keeping records to satisfy cost share and certification program requirements, the main goals of record keeping are to adjust the plan and management to improve pasture system outcomes. This requires some review and reflection to identify areas of opportunity and planning strategies to implement to make adjustments. In comparing the plan to the records, you may ask, what were the actual levels of pasture intake? What was the actual length of the grazing season? What were the actual recovery periods? What happened that the farmer didn't plan for? Was pasture condition made adequately through the season? Did animals perform as expected? Any places where the actual that happened greatly deviated from the plan is an opportunity to investigate why and think about what changes to the plan and/or management are needed. For example, if the plan estimated that the herd would need 1 acre of pasture per day based on their estimated daily pasture intake needs and pasture dry matter available, but they frequently left behind a lot that got trampled instead of utilized, pasture dry matter production may be higher than originally estimated and could be increased in your plan, which would subsequently reduce the size of the paddocks, making grazing more uniform and getting better utilization. It is also helpful to think about how things could have gone if conditions were different. Even if there weren't drought or excessively wet conditions that were experienced through the grazing season, was there ample flexibility in the system to accommodate those challenges if they had arose? If not, additional contingency planning could be helpful. In addition to looking back to the previous year to inform the current year's management, once a farmer is keeping records for several years, additional comparisons could further be helpful to identify opportunities for refining grazing management. Are the pastures supporting fewer animals now than they had been in the past? Unless a farmer has dramatically reduced the amount of supplemental feed being offered, this is likely an indication that pasture productivity is declining. Review and adjust recovery periods, post-grazing residuals, and fertility management to improve this outcome. Have there been any major changes in pasture composition? If weedy or less palatable species have established or increased in prevalence, review and adjust recovery periods, post-grazing residuals, and fertility management. Have there been more or longer periods of inclement weather, such as rain, mud, or drought, that have challenged the grazing system? In the Northeast, we expect to continue to experience increased frequency and intensity of precipitation, as well as rising temperatures into the future. If conditions are already challenging the effectiveness of the system, perhaps changes to infrastructure, land base or pasture access, and pasture goals are needed. Finally, it is always imperative to consider if the goals of the operation have changed, and if they have, consider if the grazing system and its management are still meeting these goals. For example, a farmer may decide to increase the amount of hay they make to sell for some additional income. However, if they previously grazed some of these hayfields, they may no longer have sufficient acreage to continue grazing the number of animals at the level of intake they previously were. They will need to feed more supplemental feed to the herd, decrease the herd size, or if they continue managing the same way, they will negatively impact pasture performance and longevity over time. These are just some examples of how grazing records can be used to inform grazing plan and management adjustments. More information and some farmer insights on grazing record keeping can be found in the supplemental materials for this module.